I'm Brian Cannon, this is Microdot, a Verve episode at last. If you're a follower of this channel, you'll have seen that all the videos so far pretty much have been about Oasis. Now at Microdot we obviously work with other bands, the Verve to name just one, and I have had many requests to do some videos about Verve artwork. So here we go, here's the first one, All in the Mind, the starting point being the Verve's first single. Here's a point we need to clear up right from the beginning. At this point, the Verve were just called Verve. The Verve came a bit later down the track. The first release, where they were called The Verve, was actually the No Come Down EP, the one with the pinball machine on the front. I'll drop a picture of that in here now. And the reason why they had to change the name was because there was a jazz record label in the States of the same name, i.e. Verve Records, so they had to differentiate it. So this was an American thing, and initially they were going to drop an E for America. That was the initial idea, so it would just be V-E-R-V. So the line, we're going to drop an E for America, but that didn't work out, so it was just called, so they became The Verve. So the story begins at a party in Wigan in the late 80s, hosted by my ex-girlfriend Sharon. And though this was in the days pre-internet when you used to take records to a party because there was no streaming, no downloading, if you wanted to hear something, you had to physically take it with you. And at that party, there were some records that I designed the sleeves for, namely, this was really early on in my career, this was 1989 this. So all I'd done by that point was Ruthless Rap Assassins and Kiss AMC. I don't think the moniker Microdot hadn't been invented yet, that only came in 1990. And whilst at that party, I met this young lad who had nothing in common with me, it would seem. He was like a floppy hat on with flowers on it. He was dead young, but I really hit it off with him, and we got chatting, and he was fascinated by the fact that not only did I design record sleeves, but I'd set out to do so. And he famously commented back then that most lads want to be footballers, DJs or rock stars, but I wanted to be a sleeve designer. And it transpired that that young lad was Richard Ashcroft, because he used to go to the same sixth form college that Sharon went to. The girl whose party was my ex, i.e. Winstanley College in Wigan. So that was the first meeting of any sort between me and the Verve. And that was it, we partied our ways, party ended, never saw him again. And I didn't see him again for almost 2 years, I guess. And I bumped into him at 6 o'clock in the morning on a petrol station where I'd gone for a pint of milk. Been up all night in the flat and I fancied a brew in the morning, had no milk. Walked to the petrol station, and lo and behold, whilst I was there, this car come pulling up, and out got this gangly lad who in a couple of years had blossomed into this sort of rock star looking guy. And he recognised me. He's like, "You're that sleeve designer guy." I'm like, "Wow, you're that student guy I met at the party." And he says, "Yeah, the band I was talking about," because he told me he was in a band back then. He says, "We've been signed, and if you want to do the artwork, you've got the gig." So that's how it all began. Exclusive to the Microdot website, and other t-shirts, and other Verve prints, and loads of other Verve stuff. Link in the description below. So he's basically granted me the gig to do the artwork for his band Verve, who'd just been signed. And they were signed to Virgin Records. I know it says Hut on the label. That was a subsidiary of Virgin. And what used to happen back then a lot was major labels would have these little subsidiaries to give the impression that it was actually an indie label to be more cool. But it wasn't. It was Virgin. And within Virgin, Hut was run by a guy called Dave Boyd. So I had to go to London and meet with Virgin Records and convince them that I could do the job. You've got to bear in mind, Verve hadn't had a record out yet. They didn't have any real power. And whilst Dave was cool, Dave Boyd that is, whilst he was cool insofar as he let bands have creative control, he wasn't just going to give the job to anybody. This was this was the label's new signing. And this was in the days when record companies used to spend a lot of money on bands. Before you've even put a record out, you've got the recording costs. You can't do it on a laptop like you can these days. You'd have to go into a proper studio, promotion, manufacturing, all the rest of it, and the advance that they gave to the band. You'd probably a few $100,000 into them before you've even put a record out. So they had lined up, Virgin Records that is, some London design agency who they'd obviously worked with many times before to do the band's artwork. And then Richard Ashcroft drops the bombshell that he wants this guy who he's met at a party in Wigan to do the artwork. A guy who's really got very little track record. Nobody knows who he is, i.e. me. So I had to go to London and present to them. And they just were not happy about this. So before I went to London to convince Virgin Records that I was the man for the job, I had my first meeting with the band. And the first ever meeting that I had with the Verve, or Verve as they were known then, took place in Richard Ashcroft's flat Now, we had a flat above a chemist in a district of Wigan called Orrell, and it's still there, the flat and the chemist, I think. But we discussed, you know, this single, All in the Mind, what it was all about. And, you know, Richard was telling me it's got this sort of trippy, sort of Alice in Wonderland kind of dreamscape, really. And that's how I came up with this vision of the scene in the park, which is what we ended up with, obviously. We decided to do it in Wigan Park because we were all from Wigan pretty much, and it was a place that we knew and spent our childhood there. So I had this vision in my head instantly of in Wigan Park with the band. What we were going to do was create a living room, the band sitting in the living room like at home, but around them all were all this crazy stuff breaking out, like there was another band playing, and I'll get on to all the bits and bobs later when I pull the sleeve up. But I could see it in my head, I literally could see it in my head, and in the distance I could see the fact that there was, in the park there's a statue of it's an old MP for Wigan from donkeys years ago, and it's made of bronze, so it's all gone green over time, you know. But his foot is still shiny, because every child in Wigan, as they're walking past in that park, shines his foot for good luck. So this here is the first ever Verve mock-up, art, sketch, concept, illustration, whatever you want to call it, that I did for any Verve artwork. And I did it on the spot in the meeting, and you can see, I'll zoom into this for you, there's the band all sat around, but there's actually in that sketch there, the guy with the shiny foot, the statue in the background. So when I went down to London to have the first meeting with Virgin to get them, to convince them that I was the man for the job, I went in there, and we're in this big boardroom and all the marketing people were there. Now bearing in mind they have spent a fortune on this band already, like I mentioned before. And they're like, right, here he is, here's the man for the job then. Brian, come on, show us the visuals. What ideas have you got for this amazing sleeve for the Verve that for Verve that you're going to do? But bearing in mind I'd never had a job. I left college and I went freelance from day one. So I had no concept of presentation techniques. I had no idea how it was supposed to be done. And I pulled out this and said, there it is. And they all sort of broke about laughing. Very funny, you know, where's the presentation? I'm like, no, that's it. Because I knew what it meant. I could see it in my head. And that was it. That was my first ever presentation at a Verve meeting at Virgin Records in London. So I'm going to use this to talk through the actual sleeve itself. And this is a uncut printer's proof of the sleeve. So as usual, we'll look at the sleeve credits and see who's involved in the making of the artwork. And we have got, it says here, sleeve design and art direction by Brian Cannon for Microdot. Microdot I'd come up with a name by then, and what that means is obviously sleeve design, I put all the text on it and laid it all out, but art direction means I came up with the ideas and directed the photography. Now obviously, so the process went like this. I came up with a concept having met with the band, and whilst that's like this incomprehensible thumbnail sketch, I knew what it meant. So then what the next job was to brief the photographer, in this case Michael Spencer Jones, to relay that into this, and that's how the process worked. There's also another photographer involved in this one, and that was Fiona Houston. Now Fiona Houston took the pictures of the band on the back sleeve. So I worked with two photographers on this particular job. So let's talk about some key dates here then. The key dates regarding this artwork were the first band meeting that I had with it. I don't have the exact date here, but it's prior to the 11th of December 91. So, you know, well up front of the record. I mean, the record actually came out on the 9th of March. We normally work 6 weeks up front, but on this one I noticed that the artwork was actually delivered on the 10th of February. The shoot itself took place on the 29th of January, which was the day before I saw them play for the first time. So I'd never seen them play live when I did this sleeve. I saw them play for the first time the following day in London on the 30th of January at the Borderline just off Tottenham Court Road, and it just blew my mind. I just didn't know what to expect, and they were absolutely incredible. On Wednesday the 11th of December 91, I had the infamous meeting at Virgin where I presented this elaborate visual presentation, but it got me the job, so you know. And you know what, in the end I think it looks remarkably like the finished thing. You know, the guy with the statue, he's there, the layout's more or less the same, so it all went to plan. It all happened very quickly thereafter. On the 27th of January, the Monday, we got all the props together, rounded everything up. I'll go through all those in a minute, and shot it on the 29th, and that was basically it. So to the day of the shoot itself, All the props were assembled in the park. Now let's go through and see what we've got here. In terms of the props we have, and the people as well, from the back to the front we'll go. This couple here is my mum and dad making their first appearance on a Microdot sleeve. They famously went on to be on 3 Oasis sleeves. Some might say the master plan, and do you know what I mean? I'll drop those in. And as usual, all the people involved were family and friends. Always, always, always use family and friends. I mean, it pretty much was a budget issue at this point because we didn't have any money to do this because it was very early on in the career. But you'll notice later down the line with Oasis singles, when they were massive, we still used family and friends just because they're easy to work with. This was shot in January. It was absolutely freezing. Now, whilst it looks like there's ice or snow or frost on the grass, there isn't. This was shot using infrared film. And how that affects it is any sunlight hitting any surfaces sort of burns out white. So that's why it's that white ghosted effect. And I'll show you later the actual print that was used to be scanned for the sleeve. It underwent what's called a duotoning process. So this wasn't added later. There's a blue and a sepia tone added to the original print. So we've ascertained it's not actually frosty on the grass, but it's cold this day, it's freezing. In the middle of the island there is my old mate Steve Mack. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He's passed away. He went on to front a band called the Rolling People, funnily enough, based on the Verve song. This guy here stood on this big flower pot. That's Miles Leonard, was A&R for Virgin, went on to be the head of Parlophone and massively successful in the industry. But he's dressed as a spear, a spear gun fisherman. He's actually got flippers on, and it's probably about 0 degrees, and he's just wearing a pair of shorts and he's got goggles on his head. This over here, this band, this is a band called the Bed Event. And in that band was Wayne Griggs, who went on it to be Verve's DJ. They're actually playing as well. I mean, they're not plugged in, but they're making a din, and the drummer was hitting the drums, so that's causing some racket. We've got my sister there. Again, she's no longer with us, God rest her soul. Frodgy and his missus lying in the bed. There's my old Vespa. Dave Halliwell, the band's manager, dressed as the postman. I think his dad was a postman. The preacher, Rob, who's preaching to a crowd of people in front of him here. And then obviously the band themselves up at the front. Everything's there, none of this is photoshopped. Everything that you see, that lamp was out of my flat, as were the plants. And they just sat around watching the telly with all this nonsense going on in the background. And that pretty much sums the sleeve up. Now, we had to be pretty quick doing this, really, because whilst we did have permission to do it there, we didn't shut the park off. So you can see there's some people down here, I don't know who they are, and this person here, they just happened to be walking past. So the most time-consuming bit was just getting everything and everybody into the park, and then it was like bang, 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 bang. We didn't shoot that much film. Again, as I keep reiterating from these shoots back then, it was all shot on film, which meant you had no idea what you'd got until the following day when you got it all back from the laboratory. So you had to kind of overcompensate to make sure you got it. So it was just a case of shooting the shit out of it, basically, whilst you had everybody there and whilst you had their attention, because it was very cold. And whilst the band have all got coats on, a lot of these people in the crowd didn't. So, we had to get a move on, really. So as always, we researched it, did our preparation, because there's no scope for getting any of this wrong. You've got to get it right first time every time. Especially when you bear in mind that this was the first job I'd done for Verve or Virgin, and we desperately had to get it right, because they didn't want to use us in the first place, for reasons I outlined before. So we went down there and did test shots, and I went as far as doing illustrations of the blank sleeve so I could get my head around. I mean, this is 30 years old from the time, so I could get my head around where everybody was going to be positioned, in proportion to the frame that we had, what I could fit in it. And that is the actual shot, printed full frame, and that's how it appeared on the fly poster. A landscape fly poster, which was unusual. But this, as I mentioned earlier, is the actual master print with the duotone on it, blue and the sepia tone that was achieved on the final result. So none of that was done digitally. This is done in the darkroom prior to going to print. I mean, it really was a DIY job, this. I mean, very early on in the Verve's career, very early on in my career, very little budget. Back to that thing that I mentioned in previous videos, that I didn't put a clock on it. I was given a certain amount of money to do this, and I could have just found a picture and given it to them. I didn't have to go to all this rigmarole. I did so because I wanted to do that, and I thought that's how the job should be done. But because we had no money, we couldn't go hiring stuff or spending fortune. So all this was sourced between us, like bits of my furniture, bits of Richard's furniture, bits of the band's furniture. People brought their own bits, the band bought their own stuff. So we all really mucked in together as a group effort to pull this off. So then when I had this in the bag, I remember going down to Virgin, and before, obviously the sleeves weren't printed then, but I had that image. I had to take this down to them so they could print the thing. And I remember walking into Miles Lennon's office to show him this, vindicated that, you know, we did the job. I thought, you know, if they don't like it, they're wrong. It's one of them, you know. You know when you've done a piece of work and because we are our own biggest critics. I always was, and I knew if something wasn't good enough, and I knew that was killer. So I thought, if I walk into Virgin and they said it's no good, they were wrong. I was that confident of it. And lo and behold, they loved it. And we never looked back, you know, that was it then. The relationship was born. Everything the Verve ever released, apart from Fourth, down the track, you know, way later, was done at Microdot, based on this first job that we did. So that's it, all in the mind, and the first Microdot YouTube video about Verve artwork. There will be many more to come, I promise you. There's a link in the description below to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. The Instagram handle is on screen now. Loads of interesting stuff about we did all the sleeves, not just for Verve, but for Oasis and everybody else. So again, thanks for watching, thanks for all your interest. Please subscribe, tell your friends, all the rest of it. See you in the next one.